Hey Troy,
Hello,
how
how's
goes
it
it?
going? Pretty good. Happy New Year.
Oh, you too.
Welcome to the Porter first community meeting of the year.
I know. Start off with a bang.
Yep. I have to look at the agenda. Let me see, because I'm not sharing that yet. Let me see. Do we have an agenda?
Yeah, I knew Sarah added something to the agenda. I dialing in from my phone, so I can't pull it up right now. Um, but she
You should see
wanted to talk
November
about
30th.
something. In the Porter chat, she put something that she wanted to talk
Okay.
about.
Yeah, let me look at the chat thing because it's nothing actually on at least from what I'm seeing on the agenda itself. Says she's updated it. I think. Am I looking at the wrong Hackam D? So, um,
I don't know if she's actually
she said she was gonna be late, so she wanted me to host it.
okay.
Yeah. Oh, and if we have enough people here, it's already 11:02, so I will express the need to allow everyone to know that this is being recorded. This is a CNCF project which abides by the CNCF Code of Conduct, which means basically be nice to everybody, kind of respect each other's space, and be good in all things. So after that disclaimer, I will try to share this document that I don't see anything on. Hold on, where you can tell I don't use Zoom a lot. I'm, I'm doing summary chat participant, show captions, share screen. Okay. This meeting. Okay, so can everybody see the screen?
There it is.
Okay. Yeah, it was taking a while for something. So yes, I don't see what exactly she put on the
Okay, yes. So
agenda.
there's she linked an issue in chat. It's
Okay.
it's issue or it's proposal number 5. Mix-ins are bundles.
Okay.
That's she mentioned she wanted to start talking about that. Which, yeah, I think that's probably a good thing to.
Kick
Um,
off the year.
Yeah, that was something. This is Kurt. I might be new face here. That's something I asked her to talk about. So
Perfect.
I could maybe explain a little bit about why I was asking about that. I know it's a proposal, but I could also just explain where I was coming from. But
Okay.
I don't know if that would be helpful.
Yeah, I'm trying to let me get to is it on the issue? Did you create is there a GitHub issue? I'm sorry,
I
I'm lost trying
no,
to
I
log into
I
this and
did I create an issue? I think I did create an issue. I had a
There's
chat
a
with Sarah.
proposal I know too.
Yeah, I had a chat with Sarah that's on the Porter Stack, not Stack Overflow, but the Slack. And I think I did create an issue, but I don't have it handy. But it basically
So,
points to the proposal. Oh, hi,
yeah.
Sarah.
Hi, I
oh,
can
sorry. Hey.
hear and talk now. Good news. Um, Sorry if you hear background noise. We're at a coffee shop today. So if you look into the Slack chat, there should be a link to get Porter/proposals. And that is what Kurt is referencing, is that proposal of mix-ins as bundles. Or yes, I said that right. Did we do code of conduct and everything like that already?
Yes, I
Yes.
explained and expressed the code of conduct that the CNCF that we
Cool.
should be abiding by that. I hope I did a good job with it, but we'll see on the recording. Yeah, I'm trying to pull up the link now. So like if you see me looking off screen, it's because I'm trying to look on a different window.
Course. And Kurt, if you want to kind of start going over like your use case, just to refresh my memory in the new year. Sorry, I kind of lose it all, and that could kind of like set the groundwork for this conversation.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. So actually, I'm at Microsoft and I'm on a team that we're investigating Porter. The crux of it is, obviously for deployment. And the crux is that we're thinking of some scenarios that might involve ISV. So it could be that an ISV creates a bundle, or not could be, it will be. ISP creates a bundle. In our scenario, since initially we're looking at running these bundles on Microsoft infrastructure, and in part because of that, we're thinking about security, or we're thinking about additional concerns about security because we're running it on the Microsoft subscriptions and so on. And so we were looking at different ways to improve security, such as digital signatures, SBOMs, and so on. And when I read this proposal about mixins as bundles, it just sounded like that would be an easier way to achieve some of those security goals, like to check the signatures of the mixins separately, also verify the provenance, and actually just the list of security features that's listed in the PEP definitely apply. Secure distribution, isolating sensitive data. So I think we had some ideas about how we could do it today, with, as I say, using SBOMs, checking the hashes. It's just, it would be harder. And I think it would be a more elegant and better approach for security and for other things to have mixins as bundles, is what we were thinking. The other one last thing is we are essentially hoping to whitelist these bundles, so we won't allow any bundle with any mixin to run. So we would check the bundle before we'd run it, and for example, make sure it doesn't use the exact mixin. And we would start with a limited set of mixins, some of which might be written by us, or take the existing ported ones and modify them. So we would have to be able to verify that it really is the mixin that we expect it to be and hasn't been replaced by something else.
Right.
So that's.
So in this use case, you basically create a bundle that is one of your like mixins or one of ours. And then now that you can create an SBOM off of that mixin, now you can like ensure like it has these kind of packages, these dependencies, and then that becomes this like OCI artifact that you whitelist. Is that correct?
I think so. Yeah, maybe that's getting into the details of how it would work. But yeah, we want to check that it's really the bundle is using only approved mixins.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And for like SBOM and that kind of stuff, I wanted to kind of touch base on right now we kind of have like a POC where if in your porter config you kind of like point to or add a certificate, then you can generate that SBOM and it'll sign it. And then when you pull it back down, that bundle back down, if that same certificate is in that porter config, you can validate it basically. Would you be looking for something a little bit more built out where it's using the existing like secrets plugins, or would that satisfy your initial use case?
It might be okay for now, but I think yeah, we want to have it. I guess similar to what's in the PEP. It would be great if it's integrated with existing tooling, like
Right.
Docker tooling and so on, to check the
Course.
signatures, SBOMs, etc.
Yeah, I just don't want to like be like, okay, here's phase one, and you're like, oh, I can't use this at
Yeah, I
all.
think for
And then
even for phase one, I mean, for phase one, we may have to do something like before mixins for bundles are ready. So we may have to do some of what you're describing. As I said, leverage some of the work you've already done around SBOMs that I know that actually I've seen that. I haven't looked at it in detail yet, and maybe figure out a way to sign the bundles as they are today and have an initial version of this, but we're just very interested in the roadmap, how this could simplify things and improve security and other things if mixins were also bundles.
of
So yeah,
course, yeah.
we will have to come up with something probably before that's done.
Do you have, by any chance, like an ETA on when you are looking to have this work merged, or like an ETA on like if you're able to, I don't know, help contribute to the development of it? I know we're all like new here, kind of underwater, like everything's kind of like willy-nilly.
Yes, I guess. Well, we have certain. I think that we will want to have something for our private preview, which would be this semester. And for us, I'm trying to remember when that is.
think it's March, but I don't,
Or maybe
I'm
not, maybe
also
not,
pretty
yeah,
bad at
no.
this.
And not, probably not by March, probably the
Okay.
next, I would say in the next semester for us, so like 3 or 6 months after that. So would probably be okay.
Okay.
So it's maybe like 3 to 6 months. 6 months might be more realistic, something like that.
I mean, we have the POC even for bundle signing. So like there's these two aspects here where it's signing the bundle itself, and then there's also creating the SBOM and then validating that SBOM with a certificate. So and those are both pretty similar, and it's basically getting that like free like going to the secret store and using that to sign things is going to be like the cruft of all the work, if that makes sense.
Mhm. But are you saying that you think maybe with just expanding on that with the existing way bundles work and mixins work embedded in the bundle, that we should be able to meet the goals I was describing, or are you saying that we would use these as part of this mixin as bundles implementation?
I
Or
think, well, I think for your concerns, the signed bundles and SBOMs should take care of most of it. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't implement mixins as bundles. And I think it's actually probably easier than like how fleshed out the PEP is. Just because like all you have to kind of do is fuss with the templating engine so that it doesn't require the CRUD ops. And I think that you should be able to then just make the mixin an OCI artifact. And Stephen, I'm going to assume you're driving, but you can kind of correct me on that. But if we remove kind of the upgrade, install, uninstall operations that were expected of the templating engine, then can we just roll and create like a mixin that's a bundle?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to think about on what that would look like. I'd have to dig into it a little bit more and would we need a special bundle type for mixins is what I'm wondering. Um,
I mean, wait, even at that, as I think about it a little more, the mixins as bundles, the porter operations could still just be executing. Like, we don't have to get rid of them. We could just have install, upgrade, uninstall be that mixin, if that makes sense.
mhm.
And then like there you go, you still have your OC artifact and it's still doing the same functionality of the mixin as it would do before. So it's kind of just creating like a template for each mixin now, where it's like here's our like base examples of bad word, but here's our base like artifact, and then people can use it however they need.
And
Does
then
that okay?
and then do we? I don't want to get into implementations, but like, would this be a build dependency for when you're building a bundle that needs a mixin, that it goes out and runs the dependency bundles as part of the build so that it can actually bring those mixins into the finished bundle?
That's a good Kurt question. Would you want, because I wouldn't think that mixins as bundles would have dependencies. Do y'all need dependencies on that?
I'm not sure what you mean by dependencies.
So like if I have like a mixin and I'm saying like for this mixin, that's a bundle. Or would it rely on any other mixins, or it would just be the sole encapsulation of the mixin? So we're kind of just,
Oh, okay, I see.
you know what I mean?
I can't think of like with what we're doing today, like that we're having mixins rely on other mixins. Not that I'm aware of. No. Like we
Cool.
just
That's
use the ARM mix, like the ARM mixin or the Terraform mixin or the Power Platform mixin, each independently. They're not using other mixins.
Yeah, I see it more as like an isolation concept, like you mentioned. And so that way you're just like saying like you're kind of separating it out a little bit more. So that makes a lot more sense.
But I
And
guess
so
I don't know, Steve. I was just thinking about what you said a second ago too. Like when you were saying, I don't know if I heard correctly, whether you were asking Sarah actually whether you would through this mechanism bring the bundle mixing into the bundle when it's being built, as you said, and maybe it ends up being the same that it's inside the bundle. Or you know, maybe it's a reference, you know, like you have an URL or something that references this mix-in. I don't know what the different options.
Yeah, like I said, I don't want to get into implementation details because we're still figuring out what the even requirements are for it. But I was just kind of figuring out what that would look like because of how current mixins run. Like, are we still wanting to end up with um the binary inside of the built bundle, or would we be calling out to some external bundle that
Right.
would run on our behalf? I feel like that would be the more complicated to do it. So the end goal would look the bundle would look the same. It's more about how are we installing into the bundle runtime at build.
I see. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Like you said, yeah, that there may be pros and cons to those two approaches, as you're saying. One of them mainly being difficulty, but
Well, yeah, yeah, and the other thing is what we would need to think about: how do we reconcile like SBOM for mix-in bundles to identify like the mix.
I guess what I had, I guess I had initially thought it might be different, but I don't know the details of Porter how it works. It's just thinking like from the point of view of Docker, like if Porter is essentially running Docker and a mix-in and a bundle are containers, you know, like invocation containers, then sort of Docker, if I want to run this mix-in, that's what I was doing on the CLI, just run the run that mix-in like any other Docker image, and it would maybe use the Docker features to check signature and so on.
Well, yes and no. I think on Steven's point, because of how we build bundles, it is just kind of creating maybe a new bundle type that is mixin. And so that adheres to like a different template validation that's kind of like scoped down. Because we're already, when we build a bundle, we're copying those mixins that's in like the CNAB directory into that container image and baking it. So it's just kind of like slimming things down. That being said, as far as like validation, because Porter is external to the Docker runtime, we kind of like well, I mean, you've seen it and it's not that complicated, but we're basically using like Swift to generate the SBOM and then validate it. So we're trying to keep ourselves a little bit like more on top of Docker as the runtime, but it shouldn't be that difficult. It's more of just like messing with YAML validation and adding some test cases. And then just making sure that we're delivering on the use case that you're kind of looking for on that. But I think a lot of your use cases are around security, signing, SBOM generation, validation, and isolation. And all of those things are kind of just features we're already looking at.
Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of how we take and inject the mix, and I think the ultimate goal, just based, unless we want to do a re-architecture on how the whole Porter runtime works, the ultimate goal will be how do we get the binaries that support whatever mixin into the end container. Right now, just the mixin just defines a new field that that gets dropped into the bundles Docker file that says, oh, hey, these are my mixins that I need you to install. Go get the binaries here. Oops. Hold on a second.
Every time you take a call while you're driving, I worry. I'm just your blinker. Whoops. I'm like, oh no.
Okay.
I honest.
There we go.
You're okay. Okay, cool.
Yeah. No, I'm back. So yeah, again, this is not an implementation detail meeting. I don't want to derail it with that. It's just figuring out how do we want to actually go about and make sure that the bundles or the mixins that we're doing are signed and blessed and part of the SBOM in a way that makes sense.
Yeah. And so actually what we were doing, and to kind of go into I'll go into an implementation a little bit, check time. Oh, we have so much time. And then I'm gonna just kind of open the floor to make sure that we're not kind of making this too engineering heavy. So what we're doing is we're going to inject the SBOM signed with and like have the configuration and point to where the certificate is, but we'll inject that into the OCI artifact. So it'll all kind of wrap itself together in the bundle spec. And the bundle spec is already ready to do this. It's just us like messing with the CNAB to OCI, OCI struct and type. And I think we've talked about this a little bit before. So it's not too difficult, but it does mean we're messing with the CNAB and CNAB to OCI specification and like current state. But I do think like this is kind of a call for that we need to look at messing with the template itself, especially with issues around like how we are taking in, and like there was the issue with the exec mixin where it was translating things into a different type than it expected and panicking. So I think the templating engine itself needs a little bit more love and like maybe a V2. And that shouldn't actually be that hard. It's just more of like RFCing it out and figuring out what we want to have. Does that answer everyone's thoughts and concerns? And also Solomon and Troy, I'd love to open up the floor for y'all to bring up any concerns or thoughts. If Troy, you're doing stuff with the operator, or Solomon, you want to talk about the issue, that the flaky test issue, I'm happy to deep dive into it.
Sure. Hi everyone. Thank you for listening to me on this call. I'm just someone who's just come across the project and would love to contribute. Just made a few contributions. With respect to the issue that we're talking about, so from what I could see, there is a particular test that was commented out just because it was flaky on the CI pipeline. Just sort of wanted to understand how we sort of approach like solving that problem. Is it like a test which runs locally but is flaky on CI?
Yes and no. This test is kind of the bane of my last year of existence. It's a really fun test. So that test is calling a for loop, which is iterating it over itself about 5 times. And that for loop is doing validation. It's basically running like a Porter command and saying like, I'm looking for this like string within that command. And so because we're doing that every time that we run CI, you can see that it grows like exponentially. And so we're kind of setting ourselves up for failure by running a for loop that iterates over 5 times. And then we do that like, 50, 100 times a day. So the goal is to look at this problem where we're trying to capture this string. And I think what the test is doing is making sure that we are reaching out to the bundle cache first, and then like using the cached bundle and not like regenerating a bundle when we run this command. So I think there's just like a deep dive into it to look into how we can approach this differently and use our cache more efficiently, if that makes sense.
Okay. I'll probably come back with more follow-up questions. I'll try to run that locally once just to see how things are and just to understand the code flow, and then probably come back.
Of course. Yeah, I would recommend wrapping that locally and like your own loop to iterate over it like 10 times, and then try to approach this problem by, I can get you the code of the loop itself and look at the problem and say, how can I remove this loop and still get the same kind of or better results.
Okay.
And welcome to the project. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Troy, do you have any comments, concerns, complaints today?
Yeah, I didn't want to take this time to try to use this as an implementation situation, but again, I had some, from the operator perspective, if we could try to replicate that logic, I would try to see like where that needs to actually take place at the host level on some instances for containers that might need to dig into the host for doing some of this mix and bundle situation, or would it just be to validate SBOMs and things like that? So I can't find the PEP link if there is one. I put that in the meeting notes, but I do want to sit with this for a while so I can more understand the problem and actually integrate the solution within the operator and abstract away a lot of stuff, because I think currently we had issues with deleting installations, right? And because we wanted to persist, but then we have a store that's outside of Kubernetes that's doing that. And I don't want to reattach that same problem with trying to implement a solution that's going to take away from the Kubernetes native bundle experience that we have currently, right? And going forward because of the gaps that we have. So I do, again, I do want to be able to like deconstruct this problem to its bits for the operator, because it might not be the same implementation strategy that we have doing this locally with Porter.
Yeah, and I think the big key there is if we keep the ultimate behavior the same, where the bundle that ultimately gets built for the image that ultimately gets built for a particular bundle includes all of its dependencies inside of it. So like if we're distributing our mixins as bundles, then that means that we're distributing them as bundles, but we're not necessarily running them as external containers. And that would be the same behavior we have now, but with an additional layer of being able to validate the mix-in before we install it instead of just pulling down from a source. But if we say we're going to distribute the Terraform mix-in as a bundle that we just throw data to inside of like a run command, then we lose some compatibility in Docker, because that would now be an additional container that would need we would need to make sure we spin up as like a subset again of the Docker run or the Porter installation CRD that we create, and then we have to get configs into all of those different containers in Docker or in Kubernetes. So that would be my initial thoughts, is how can we distribute them as bundles, but have that resolve at bundle build time. And then the ultimate bundle we build and publish is still fully self-contained. It now just has maybe an additional piece of metadata for validating the mix-in signatures or something like that.
Okay, hang on. I got questions. I got concerns. What you talk about spinning up a Docker container to install the bundle, correct? Because like in my head, we are just adding kind of like this like external build logic on top of the logic we already have. So I imagine like the workflow is that I run porter install -- sbom or whatever. And part of that logic is built into that porter install command. So I don't need to spin up the other runtime because it's already there.
No,
I
I'm
feel like
saying
I'm missing something.
I'm saying that on when not a porter install behavior does not change. That the porter build behavior is when we do all of the resolving of our mix-in bundles and validating them, and that becomes maybe part of the signature of the in bundle that we just built. But the porter install still has everything inside of that bundle, the build OCI image, and we're not resolving at install time for a bundle. Everything gets resolved at build time like it does now, right?
Oh, yes, yeah. Okay.
So
Uh,
from what I'm saying, from an operator perspective, nothing changes if we keep the install behavior the same, as long as the bundle that we build has everything self-contained inside of it. Now, if we say, no, we don't want that, we want to ship stuff off to these mix-ins and have them run externally from the bundle at install time, that's where it becomes significantly more complicated.
We need like a whiteboard. I kind of we should have like Troy's right. We should have a technical deep dive into this, because I think this is a whiteboard conversation,
Yes, for sure.
because I'm totally missing some key aspects here. Speaking of the operator, I wanted to touch base on upgrade functionality. And, do we have any ideas for that, even if it's like an MVP, or like how difficult it is to build in that reconciliation logic? Sorry, can't say words today.
I
Sorry, I
believe
couldn't find
that.
the.
What are you looking
Go
for?
ahead, Troy.
No, I said I couldn't find the mute key.
I
But
can't help you with that.
right. So no, we had a little bit of this discussion before the break, and I was wondering kind of like what we can do to create a solution around this, because of how you use a state currently within. So for instance, the CR represents the state of what the installation looks like, right? But then that state is held somewhere else within Mongo or whatever, and we want to be able to use that same stuff and represent. So it's kind of it's not a chicken egg problem. It's just more of a, how do we want to encapsulate that logic within the reconciliation loop? So like if we're doing an upgrade, what does that mean? And how does that actually take place? And how do we represent the installation to look like that? So I can try to do some prototyping around a bundle. I think what I needed was the because we did the GRCP stuff, right? But I think what I needed out of that was to see that go from one installation to the next, and how that needs to be represented not only on the cluster but within the actual spec of the resource that's defined. So that's kind of where I'm looking at it from. I don't know if there's anything else Stephen wants to provide around that.
Yeah, I mean, from a Kubernetes native standpoint, like there's really nothing changing about the installation resource. It's just a new revision, right? It's going to be a new version of that resource. It's been so long since I've touched this. I need to get back in there and take a look at that reconcile loop. I thought upgrade was working. We just change the parameters and rerun the bundle and it worked. The problem is that we haven't gotten that to reflect in the installation outputs yet, right? Is that correct? Or are we?
Yes,
not
that's what I
currently
believe. I
Okay,
believe that
okay,
it
so
doesn't update
it-
the.
Yes, installation upgrades isn't a separate logic flow. Like it's just a new version of the installation resource. And I'm pretty sure we're handling that already. I'll double check in the reconcile logic on that. But then we just need to figure out, given we upgraded a resource, well, we need to actually get the latest outputs out of it. So that shouldn't be too difficult to do. But we can, yeah, we need to figure that out for sure.
Sounds like we need a lot of technical deep dives soon. Since we don't
Yeah,
have anything on,
the gRPC service that grabs those outputs, it just grabs the latest outputs from the porter, from the backend state for the porter config. Like it's not even looking at anything Kubernetes related. It just goes out to Mongo and says, hey, what do you have in your store for the latest outputs for this installation? So we should be getting those every time we hit that gRPC service for get outputs for installation foo. We should be getting the latest outputs for that installation. We just need to make sure that
I don't think it's
reconcile
fetching.
that.
Like I think that's what's happening. Like there's no logic. And I don't know if this is correct. It's just off of old conversations I had with Troy. I don't think it's fetching any of those, like it's creating the things, but Porter doesn't know to fetch it.
Okay. Yeah, we need to have a dive on that.
Okay, cool. Does anyone else have anything they want to bring up? There's like some documentation issues and we're migrating CI/CD soon. Well, by soon, I mean right now, but I'm happy to also touch base on things.
I just want to make sure that it is captured as part of this meeting, because I haven't had a chance to go back and fix it and I don't want it to get lost, but we don't have the correct Kubernetes native functionality for deleting the installations. And we need to, I guess, figure out how we want to handle that, because I mean, previously the ultimate goal was we don't delete the installation resource. We set it to an uninstalled state so that we keep that state around. And then that got changed. And now the deletion behavior isn't what it used to be for deleting a CRD directly. So yeah, that's a bug we need to go back and
What do you want the
resolve
delete flow to
soon.
look like?
Well, there was a really conscious decision initially before I started working on the operator that once you create an installation, you don't, like, that installation resource stays in your cluster for tracking and auditing purposes. And whether or not it's active is dependent on whether it's installed true or not. I think it's uninstalled. If uninstalled is set to true, then that installation is not active, but we don't actually delete the installation out of the cluster. The problem with that is then we have issues with running just a normal flow for you know cluster maintenance where you just want to clean up a namespace, but all of a sudden you can't clean up a namespace because you have installations that you can't delete to clean up that installation because there's got that finalizer on there. So I'm really not sure. I would want to maybe talk to somebody who is a hardcore Cube admin and maybe figure out how another there's another Argo related operator that does some similar kind of infrastructure and maybe look and see how they're doing it. We just need to define what we want from a Cube admin standpoint this to look like.
Yeah, initially that's kind of why we changed it so you can delete it because people couldn't delete the
Mhm.
namespaces.
Yeah,
And then
exactly.
so then I was like, well, we don't want to, if your constraint is the environment you're in, which is Kubernetes, and then I don't believe allowing them to not delete something is something that we would want to introduce because that takes away from the environment they're used to working in, right?
Mhm.
From that perspective, I feel like that means we have to be able to allow them to do that. If we need to
Yeah.
create a resource that says like, hey, once you delete this, we create this configuration thing that says this was your installation. Now this sits as a configuration that you can then delete if you want to as well, but that stays there. And then that doesn't carry a finalizer. So if you want to delete the namespace, that gets created, but then that also can get deleted in a sense where the installation has an audit trail of around whatever. And then those
Mhm.
things can say that. Does that make sense? Because it sounds it's sort of like you're allowed to delete the installation resource, right? Or the CR, whatever you want to call it. Because you deleted it, we want to take that information and put it somewhere. So you have an audit trail of that installation actually being installed, deleted, or whatever. And if we want to reinstall it, we can say, hey, does this configuration exist? And if it does, you can just pull those things in or do whatever, right? I don't know if we want to do that because that's creating more overhead in my opinion, where
Yeah.
you're creating,
Mhm.
right? But again, I think we understand that we can't allow them to not be able to
Yep.
delete their stuff. And I think
Yeah,
that's
I
kind
think
of,
we need to have what's the Kubernetes flow for this look like and have that drive the design. I don't want to create some unicorn operator that like, oh, well, in order to manage the namespace that this operator does stuff in, you have to do these special things. Like I don't want to do that.
Okay, this is a PEP, or at least as a GitHub issue, so that we can start like kind of outsourcing workflows. Do you both agree?
Yes,
yes.
for sure.
Okay. I'm trying to think of takeaways. So let's one of you make the GitHub issue to talk about the delete workflow more, or find an old issue and revive it. Can you both also, let's start to set a meeting to talk about the upgrade process.
Okay, sounds good. I'll create the issue for the delete flow.
Troy, you got upgrade?
Sure.
Okay, cool. All right. Cool. Also, KubeCon is happening soon. They're doing booth nominations. I nominated us. If you're planning to go to KubeCon Paris, let me know. I'd love to have people help with booth duty. And if you want to do a maintainer talk with me, just ping me, let me know. Sound good?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Do we have a takeaway for the bundle or Vixen as bundles? Or we just need to have a follow-up meeting to actually dive into what implementation looks like?
Let me make a graph on it. I'm gonna make a graph. I'll set up a follow-up meeting end of next week, and I'll kind of list out some different options to attack it.
Perfect.
Thank you, Kurt, for taking time of your day to discuss your use case, and we really want to take it serious, and I want to build out the SBOM feature. So I appreciate you coming. Thank you all for being here today, and I will see you on the internet.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. See ya.
Bye.